In this problem, we will be given several verbal expressions, such as the one I'm showing here, and we are to write those expressions in symbolic form, and we will write our answers in symbolic form in this area here. If our answer involves any negative numbers, we are to put parentheses around them to answer these questions. However, it is not necessary to put parentheses around negative results in the calculated results part of the question. So to show you how one of these problems may go, let's look at this example. I'm going to write the symbolic representation of -9 minus the product of 5 and 4. Now it turns out the word product means multiplication. So the product of 5 and 4 would mean to take 5 and multiply by 4. So what I've written here is the product of 5 and 4. Now I need to read what they want me to do with that. They want -9 minus the product of 5 and 4. So I will take -9, and since this number is negative and I'm answering the part of the question that asks for the symbolic form, I need to put that in parentheses. So I have -9, and now I want minus what we found before, which was the product of 5 and 4. So this is what you would type into MathAS, and you would type it in this area here where it says write the symbolic representation of the verbal expression that's given in the problem. Then you are to type the calculated result in this area. To do the calculated result, I must use order of operations, and if you remember order of operations, parentheses come first, then exponents, and then any multiplication or division, and that would be done left to right. Whichever occurs further to the left you would do first. And then finally, after all of that is done, you would do any addition or subtraction. So in my problem, I have a set of parentheses here, but there's no operations within the parentheses to perform. So that is not what is meant by the P for parentheses. And then there are no exponents in my problem. However, there is multiplication. So the multiplication will be done before the subtraction. So to do the calculated result, doing the multiplication first, I'm going to copy the -9, copy the subtract symbol, and then say that 5 times 4 is 20. The only operation left in the problem is the subtraction. So to do -9 minus 20, I simply perform that and say that that is -29. Since this answer is negative, you may be worried about whether you need to put it in parentheses or not, but it is not necessary in the MathAS question at least to write this in parentheses. In fact, you may be marked wrong if you do so. Let's do another example. Suppose I want 5 less than the sum of 9 and -3. So before I can find out what 5 less than something is, let's first agree on what that something is. So I'm actually going to start with this part of the problem, and notice the word sum means to add. So what are the two things that I'm going to add together? It says the sum of 9 and -3. So here is the number 9, here is the number -3, and I want the sum of 9 and -3, and sum means to add. So I'll put a plus symbol between them. Now what I need is I want 5 less than that sum. If you're confused what it means to have 5 less than this sum, it may be helpful to think of this sum as a single number. In fact, 9 plus a -3 is indeed 6. So rather than thinking of it as 5 less than the sum of these two numbers, you could think of it as, what would it mean to be 5 less than 6? So like if you had $6 and your friend had 5 less than you did, that would mean that your friend has $1, meaning that 5 less than 6 is 6 minus 5. So if you had $6 and your friend had 5 less than you, 5 less than $6, then that would mean he has $1. So even though the 5 less than statement becomes at the beginning of the sentence, it actually appears to the right in your symbolic form. So when I see 5 less than this sum, it means take that sum and find out what 5 less than that sum is. So here's my sum. This would be 5 less than that. And that would be the answer for the symbolic representation, and you would want to use parentheses around that negative number. No parentheses are needed here because this is not a negative number. In fact, it's a positive 5. This symbol is indicating that you're subtracting it. Now to do the calculated result, in PEMDAS, addition and subtraction are on the same level. There are no operations within parentheses to perform. There's no exponents and there's no multiplication or division. Since addition and subtraction are on the same level, these are performed left to right. So I would just do the first one here on the left of addition, and I'll do the subtraction last. So 9 plus negative 3 is 6. Copy the subtract 5. And 6 minus 5 is 1, so my calculated result would simply be the number 1. Let's do another example. Here we have the sum of the product of 4 times 6 and the quotient of 27 over 3. So I'd like to take these longer sentences and break them in pieces. So for example, let's figure out what the product of 4 times 6 is. Let's also figure out what the quotient of 27 over 3 is. After we find those two things, then we can find their sum, which means take what I've circled in red and add it to what I circled in black, because the word sum means to add those two things. So product means multiplication, and we want the product of 4 times 6. It was helpful that they wrote the word times in here to indicate multiplication, but had they just written the product of 4 and 6, it would still mean that 4 and 6 are being multiplied together. So here we have the product of 4 and 6, or if you want, the product of 4 times 6. Then later in the question they have the quotient. Quotient means to divide two numbers, and it says they want the quotient of 27 over 3. So this would be 27 over 3 is a common way of saying 27 divided by 3. And they could have just said the quotient of 27 and 3, and it would have been the same thing. So now the idea is I have two numbers here. I have this first number, I have this second number. The question is, what am I to do with those two numbers? And the answer is that I am to find their sum. So I will put a plus symbol between them. Now remember, when you go to type this in MathAS, it'll look a little different. You will be typing in 4, and then to get a multiplication symbol, you'll be holding Shift on your keyboard and pressing 8 to get an asterisk, then the number 6. It was not necessary to put these in parentheses, by the way. I was doing so just to illustrate that that could be thought of as a single number, and this could be thought of as a single number, and we were to find their sum, but parentheses are not necessary. Then we add, and then 27 divided by 3, you would be using the key on your keyboard that looks like this, which is the key just to the left of one of your shift keys, and then 3. That should be sufficient for the symbolic representation. Then the calculated result, you'll have to remember, order of operations are such that you do parentheses first. I don't have any. Exponents next, then multiplication and division, and you do that left to right. So I will perform this operation first because it's multiplication and it's further to the left. 4 times 6 is 24. I'll copy the rest of the problem. Now in my problem I have addition and division always comes before addition. So I will do the division first. 27 divided by 3 is 9. Finally I add 24 and 9 to get 33. Let's do at least one more example. Here we have the square of negative 2 decreased by 6. So we need to find a number and then decrease it by 6. What number are we decreasing by 6? Whatever you get when you take the square of negative 2. So here's the number negative 2. And we don't want just the number negative 2. We want the square of negative 2. So squaring something in math means you're raising to the second power. So now what I've written is the square of negative 2. And I want to take that number and I want to decrease it by 6. The square of negative 2 decreased by 6. So I'll take this number and decrease it by 6, make it smaller if you will, by subtracting 6. So this is exactly what you would type in MathAS, except to get an exponent, you will want to use the caret key that can be found by holding the Shift key down and pressing 6. And then you'll be typing 2, and this means negative 2, that quantity is being squared, and then subtract 6. Then to do the calculated result over here, negative 2 squared means that you have negative 2 being multiplied by negative 2. Don't forget to subtract 6 here. And negative 2 times negative 2, remember multiplication comes before subtraction, or you could think of it as up here exponents come before subtraction. Either way, negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Copy the subtraction of 6, and 4 minus 6 is negative 2. And because this part of the answer is in the calculated results portion of the question, you need not put parentheses around it. In fact, you may be marked wrong if you do. Here's another problem where we are to find 5 times the sum of negative 3 and 2. And whenever I see the word sum or product or quotient, they're always talking about either adding, multiplying, or dividing two numbers. So I tend to group that as one piece, and I look for the two numbers that they're talking about. So sum means I'm supposed to add two numbers together. So then I wonder what those two numbers would be. They're saying it's the sum of negative 3, and I will put that in parentheses, and 2, so 2 would be my second number. So this is the sum of negative 3 and 2. Now I want to take that whole quantity and find what 5 times that is. So the idea is you would want people to sum this together first and then find 5 times that sum. So you need to figure out a way to communicate to people that they are going to do the addition before the multiplication. So for example, if you were just to take what you have now and say multiply by 5, then you wouldn't be multiplying the sum by 5, you'd only be multiplying the negative 3 by 5. Somehow you need to get that entire sum to be multiplied by 5. So to get people to do the addition before the multiplication, when normally multiplication comes before addition, is to go way over here and use some grouping symbols, either a parenthesis or a bracket. So what you do is put another set of parentheses. I like to make them a little bigger to help group them. Or if you wanted, you could use brackets, and brackets would mean the same thing as parentheses here. To make things simple, I would just write another set of parentheses, and I would type it in exactly like that in MathAS. Now to do the calculated result, order of operations has me doing parentheses first, and there is an operation within the parentheses, so I will be doing this first, meaning I'm going to copy the 5, copy the multiplication symbol, and perform the operation within the parentheses. Negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. Now there's only one operation left, which is multiplication. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. And because we're writing negative 5 in the calculated result part of the question, you need not put parentheses. Let's do one last example. Here I have negative 3 subtracted from the quotient of negative 12 and 6. Again, whenever I see the word sum, product, or quotient, I try to group that in my mind and figure out what are the two numbers am I actually finding the sum, product, or quotient of. Quotient means to divide, so we're going to be dividing two numbers. I need to know what is the first number, which will go in the numerator or top of my fraction, and what the second number is in the sentence, which would be in the bottom or the denominator of my fraction. And it says I want the quotient of negative 12, so I'll put negative 12 here, and 6, and it turns out whatever number is written first goes in the numerator, and whatever number is mentioned later will be in the denominator. So this is the quotient of negative 12 and 6. Now what we want is the number negative 3 to be subtracted from this number. So that means to put it over here and take this number and subtract it from this quotient over here. So the number they want me to put here is negative 3. So let me put that in parentheses. So what we have is negative 3 being subtracted from the quotient of negative 12 and 6. Remember, when you type this in MathAS, you will be putting parentheses around the negative 12. You'll be using the symbol that looks like this on your keyboard, just to the left of the Shift key, instead of this fraction bar here. And then you would just be copying the rest of the problem here, and you would type it in MathAS as follows. Then the calculated result you would find by following the order of operations. And what we have here is division and subtraction, and order of operations say that division always comes before subtraction. So doing the division first, negative 12 divided by 6 is negative 2. And then I copy the rest of the problem down. And now there's only one operation left, and that's subtraction. Negative 2 subtract a negative 3 can be thought of as negative 2 adding a positive 3. in which case you'd get the answer 1, so the answer to my problem would just be the number 1 in the calculated result portion of the problem.